Welcome back to another episode of the Nourish with Renata podcast. Now, today I'm super excited because we get to talk about something that I think has gotten a lot of light over recent years, and that is the interaction of various foods and environmental toxins on children with autism. So, what's really fun is I get to introduce you to one of my friends that I met last year, I think, and we immediately hit it off. Not only because of our love of sourdough, but other things too, especially health and nutrition. And so I'm so thrilled to be able to share with you the wonderful Megan. How's it going?
I'm great. How are you, Renata?
So good. So I'd love for you to share with everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So my name is Megan. Like you said, I have a 3-year-old, almost 4-year-old who has autism, and we received his diagnosis when he was about 2.5. Um, Postpartum, I was very overweight and really like recognized at a young age that I was going to really, or at a young age for our child, that I was really going to need to be able to keep up with him. And in the state of my health at the time, I was not able to do that. So I really took charge, made the changes that I need to make, and lost a significant amount of weight. But during that, we also recognized the impact that the food and environment around us was also impacting our child. Um, I became an online personal fitness and nutrition coach, worked with a handful of women to work through challenges mindset wise, lifestyle wise, to create more of a balance and really ditch the diet mindset. Recently, we have gone gluten and dairy free for my child. We went artificial dye free a few years ago and have really noticed some great changes in his behaviors, in his ability to communicate, and just different things like that around his autism, what they call symptoms, essentially.
Yeah. So I love that you mentioned that because that's exactly where I want to go next in terms of how various foods are affecting your son. So obviously, first things first, you said you went dye free at the very beginning. So what was that experience like? What dyes should we be looking out for? And also, why did you choose to implement that first?
Great questions. So, we recognized that there were like a handful of weekends out of a month where we would go and like hang out with some friends. And we were much more lenient on what we were allowing him to eat. And then it was like come Sunday night, Monday morning, I feel like I was really having to fight to get my child back. And we kind of took a step back and we're kind of analyzing like, well, what went different this weekend? Like, what did he eat? I started doing some research on artificial dyes and dyes like red 40, yellow 3. Those are the two top big ones. Have research linked to behavioral issues, ADHD type behaviors, aggressive behaviors, and really looking at how many foods they were in really was astounding to see how much they're in. It's so, so sad. Like white icing has dye in it.
Of course.
Just yeah, the silliest things. And so we kind of decided that that was a really great route for us to take. And this was before we had our autism diagnosis also. So we started cutting those out. And it takes a while for them to fully be out of his system. I think it was about 20, 30 days before we saw like consistent changes.
Oh,
But then there were a handful of times that he got back into the dyes, and it would just be like something by accident where we didn't even think to read a label. And we would see the behaviors almost immediately, like kind of just like uncontrollable, not necessarily tantrums, but just like body movements, and would just be like very wound up, kind of constantly with no real means to like settle him down. And
mm,
so we've been dye free for about 2 years now and rarely get into them. But when he does get into them now, there's like much less of a reaction to it. Um, so I know that it's something that his system has definitely worked out. And if he does have them, it's in very small doses. But I've also done a lot of research in regards to like what the United States allows in food versus other countries. And so like there'll be foods here in the United States that are full of red 40, yellow 3, blue 6, all of the dyes, and the Canadian or the UK version has beet powder or spirulina and different things like that that are more natural. And then there's also a lot of research that talks about the behaviors and the ADHD here in the United States that don't happen in other countries. I have a really great feeling that that is directly related to the amount of dyes that our kids are consuming.
mm. Wow. That is so eye-opening, I'm sure, for many people because I mean, how often are the majority of parents checking the labels of any of the foods that we're getting from the grocery store or we get at birthday parties, et cetera, et cetera? and connecting those dots with their children's behavior. Sometimes I
Absolutely.
think we like connect it with maybe sugar, but in terms of some of like really dialing into specific ingredients, I think there's a lot of people that are coming into awareness around the effect of various diets, and it is so many of the packaged foods that we can pick up very
Absolutely.
easily.
I agree.
Yeah. So we started off with the diets. You noticed, wow, 20 to 30 days to get that out of the system, but obviously a great improvement there. So you mentioned previously about gluten and dairy. So what made you think, I want to try this next step, which obviously can sound pretty daunting? How did you make that decision?
So we actually have a really good friend who was our photographer. Um, for like very randomly found her on Google before my husband and I got married. She's become a really great friend, taken all of our family pictures. She's also a nurse. And she has 3 children, and they all are gluten free, dairy free. She runs an Instagram page also with like gluten free, dairy free recipes. And she'd come to town about Christmas time to take some pictures for us. And we kind of just got to talking about it, and she like brought to light to me how inflammatory they can be for anybody, really, gluten and dairy, but especially kids with autism, because that's one of the biggest issues is that there is inflammation in their brain, which kind of prohibits everything from growing correctly and giving them space to be able to think, essentially. And so it just doesn't operate the same when they're as inflamed. And so we started to go down the rabbit hole. um, of course, I wanted to just like rip the band-aid off and go gluten-free, dairy-free right now, but it was hard. Um, my son was someone who drank a glass of milk with Ovaltine in it every morning, and so he would still wake up and ask for chocolate milk. And we tried a bunch of different chocolate milks. I tried mixing Ovaltine with it still, but Ovaltine also has dairy in it.
Uh,
So just like it was just not working. He doesn't drink milk at all anymore. He doesn't ask for it. Cheeses, we found a really good alternative, and he's gotten into dairy a couple times, but with the dairy, like the biggest side effect that I've noticed with him is constipation, but that also leads to like a grumpy toddler in
yes.
all reality.
Yes.
And so, but with the gluten, I noticed a rash that he was getting. And so I
Mm,
cut the gluten out. And we've been more strict with the gluten because it is, I don't want to say it's easier. It's not. Gluten's in so many things that you wouldn't even expect gluten to be in. Um, and even though we aren't 100% gluten free, dairy free, I have noticed a really drastic difference. And his rash is almost completely gone. When we first cut back, it went away completely, but then I know that he like got into a couple things, and so it started to come back. But all around, like his behaviors have decreased a lot. We had like a friend get together recently, and he had like a lot of gluten, some sugar, I think some dyes maybe, and it was definitely noticeable. Like he was
mm.
very wound up, almost, I don't want to say out of control, but just like kind of right on borderline aggressive. And I know like the feeling that we get when we eat too much sugar and we're just like kind of in a slump and like don't feel our greatest. They feel that also in their little tiny bodies, and they don't know how to work through that, how to handle it. And so it really makes a big difference. I also have a friend, another mom who has a child with autism, and they cut out gluten. Her son is nonverbal and has slowly like started talking. They
That's
haven't started any
amazing.
services or anything, but just like those small changes, taking that inflammation away is giving them such great results already.
Wow. Well, I love having those two examples. So specifically for you going from obviously a rash that must have been quite persistent and you probably weren't unsure of where that was coming from. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And was the rash like because I think that not many people realize that skin changes can help us to determine issues with some food sensitivities or allergies. So in terms of the rash itself, was that like a full body rash? Like was it itchy and bumpy? How did that present?
It was red and bumpy. It wasn't full body. It was just on his bottom. And he didn't ever act like it bothered him. I think it bothered me more than it really bothered him.
Sure. Yeah.
But um, just research that I had done, a lot of the arrows were pointing to gluten as well.
Yeah. And I know with adults too that might have a gluten sensitivity or intolerance. a similar kind of rash can also present. It might not be on the behind, but it might be elsewhere on the body. And that's also something really important to look for, especially if you're concerned about a gluten sensitivity or intolerance, because some people sometimes think, well, it's just going to affect me in terms of my bowel movements or brain fog, et cetera, et cetera. It can actually present in many different ways. There can be
Yeah.
many symptoms associated.
Yes. And there's actually a book called Grain Brain that talks a
Yes.
little bit. Have you read it?
Yeah, that's a really good book. We should definitely link that, because I think that will open a lot of people's eyes to what potentially can occur with various types of grains or gluten.
Yes, I haven't read the whole book, but I actually listened to a podcast last week from the author of that book. I can send you the link to that also. It was about an hour-long
Yeah.
podcast just kind of talking about the book and some of the studies in it. And one of them was talking about they had a younger child who was in school, had extreme ADHD, and the doctor's first idea was like, let's put him on Ritalin. And the
Mm,
parents were like, hold on, that's really extreme. And they ended up seeing, I believe it's the author of the book, the doctor.
mm.
And he said, let's try gluten free. And they did. And the teachers reached out to the parents and they were like, oh my gosh, thank you for putting him on medicine.
Whoa. But there was no
That
medicine.
it wasn't medicine. They just took gluten out of his diet.
Wow.
And he completely changed. And then in that podcast, I also learned about a test called the Cyrex 3, which is
Mm,
a test that tests for different gluten sensitivities. And so if it is something that people really need like research or numbers to see like, oh, okay, I do need to make this change, that is something that you can like talk to your doctor about getting tested for and really advocating for your own health in that regards for your children as well.
I love knowing that. That's super helpful. I also want to point out the difference between gluten that might be occurring in breads and sourdough, because I mentioned at the top of this, like we're both somewhat obsessed with sourdough.
Yes.
And I remember asking you, well, so can your son have sourdough? And do you remember what your response to that was?
Yes. I haven't noticed differences. I haven't noticed behaviors or like any inflammation, rashes, or anything from eating sourdough.
Awesome. And do you want to explain why that might be? Because I think we both understand a little bit more about sourdough and why it can be more effective for our health.
Absolutely. So when you make sourdough, and also sourdough is not just the flavor, it's the type of bread. Sourdough, when you make it, it's fermented. And so it also helps to break down the gluten in the bread. And it can be not as strong as a typical whole wheat white bread in the store. It also has a lower glycemic index and it's easier for your body to digest.
And obviously, because of sourdough being created in the way it is, as Megan explained, what's cool is that it's better for your gut health as well, which means that you have higher potential of absorbing more nutrients, the vitamins and minerals from the foods you are consuming. So that's also really cool in terms of a double whammy.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Okay, so I love pointing that out in terms of gluten, and I have to just say once again, like how incredible is it for the woman that you're helping with her son going gluten free, who is nonverbal, starting to be able to speak. Like that is incredible.
Huge. Yes. Yes, and
And
I'm
what a
in a
relief.
handful of autism groups on Facebook, and it's becoming a more and more frequent conversation. Like, has anybody tried this? What results have you seen? And a lot of people are popping up and saying, we've done it. We've seen the changes in behavior. We've seen the changes in verbal communication. We've seen the changes in meltdowns. Like, definite, definitely, like you said at the beginning, it's coming more to light in the community.
That's so good. So we've talked a lot about dyes, gluten, and dairy. And I also want to point out one more thing because I asked you this question before. For us as moms, I feel like we're very tuned into how our kids are responding, but our spouses may not be. And so I actually asked you the question of like, has your husband noticed these changes in your son's behavior? And I'd be really curious for you to share that with everyone because I think that also helps us to notice like it's not just in our heads, right? Like these things are real and it's really happening.
Yes, definitely. So at first, I don't think he really recognized it, but my husband also wasn't around a lot because of the amount that he worked. So he used to work like
Mhm.
6 or 7 days a week. He didn't always see like sun up to sundown everything. But now that we have made the changes and that he's more present, he definitely does see when he's gotten into something that like wasn't supposed to be. And there's been a couple times where he's like, oh, he got into something. And so he's like recognizing it also. Um, and really being able to identify where we missed a step or where we missed something. And so sometimes it just needs to be a little bit more of a conversation of like, hey, this is how it was before. These are the changes that we've made. Do you see the changes? And as soon as you give them a chance to really think about it, they're like, oh, yeah, actually.
Yeah, and that helps so much with support because I can only imagine, especially if you don't have a great small group community such as ones that you've created to help to support moms that have kids with autism, it can feel so isolating. Like you feel like
Yes.
you're the only one seeing these issues. Or perhaps, like you had mentioned as well, parents are taking their kids to the doctors and the only recourse seems to be medication. But there's
Yeah.
so much more that we can do, especially around nutrition.
Yes.
Mm.
100%. I think that there really needs to be a bigger magnifying glass on nutrition for all kids, but especially for kids with autism because it is just a step a little bit deeper for them.
100%. Okay, so nutrition is huge. And before we started recording, excuse me, I actually asked you about environmental toxins. So this one is super interesting. Have you noticed any kind of things in the environment that have been triggering some of those autistic symptoms that might be surprising to people?
So it wasn't like directly an autistic symptom, but I lit a candle and I immediately got a headache. And then my son also started sneezing. And so that automatically told me that like there was something there that our body was reacting to. And I threw away all of our candles. And have definitely like cut back on the amount of fragrance that we have, the type of fragrance that we have in our house. But kind of like we were talking about, like phthalates and BPA and everything like that. My next step, honestly, is to get rid of like
Mm,
plastic Tupperware in our house. And
yes.
I want to go to like glass Tupperware and kind of go down that route. So that's one of my next steps that I want to deep dive into.
Yeah, so I definitely agree. Fragrances are around us constantly, whether it is in candles or room fresheners or even like the soap that we use, right?
Oh my gosh, some soap has dye in it.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that. Oh, that's really
Yes.
good awareness. Okay.
Yes, and, like, your skin being your biggest organ, and you're washing
Your
your
hands
clothes
how
to
many
dye,
times
and
a
then you're
day?
wearing them
Yeah.
all day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's really helpful to know.
Sorry, I
So I
didn't mean
love
to as
that.
soon as you said soap, I was like, "Oh, that's another
Yeah.
thing."
So good, but also so important because especially if you think, okay, I'm looking at the food ingredient labels, I'm doing all these things, maybe we haven't yet looked at something like detergents or hand soaps. So that's actually really important to consider as
Yeah.
well. In addition, you talked about BPAs, so bisphenol A, which can occur in many plastics. There's also some plastics you can get that don't have BPA, or for instance, canned goods that don't have BPA in the lining. So those could be really helpful. And then I will say, because I talk about BPAs a lot in terms of hormones and hormone disruptors for the endocrine system, sometimes it's helpful to do it gradually over time. So, like, one of the things I've said to some of the women in my coaching has been like, if it's your birthday or like Mother's Day coming up or, something's coming up, great thing to ask for. And it's going to literally serve everyone in the family because we're continuing to reduce the toxin load in our houses.
Yes, yes.
Love that. So
On my
good.
Amazon wish list right now is, like, meal prep containers that are glass,
Yes.
because I know somebody's gonna look at it with Mother's Day coming up and everything. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
get some meal prep containers.
Yeah, and especially because I know your son's getting older now, so now we have, like, a slightly reduced risk of things getting broken.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And also with him getting older, where you're, like, able to have the conversations with him. Like, he's been very aware of the artificial dyes, like, us not doing those for a long time. We had a neighbor one time who, like, offered him some pistachios or something, some kind of tree nut, and he said, "These have artificial dye in them." This guy was like, "What?"
It's so cute,
Because it
though.
is, like, a conversation that we've had with him to bring awareness to him and how they don't make us feel good and, like, the side effects of them. So now also having those conversations about gluten and dairy, and if he does have it, really reflecting back on how he's feeling afterwards and kind of pinpointing like, okay, you're feeling this way, but like what did we eat? And so really being able to have those conversations.
Wow. I love that you're having those conversations with him because that's a huge part of it. Otherwise, we're as parents constantly like helicopter parenting, right? And then trying to guard him against all these things. But if he can do that, if he has the awareness, that is literally equipping him for the rest of his life because I mean, these things are going to continue to pop up.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, that's so great. And I think such a great learning for parents too. Like, keep having those conversations with your kids if you're able, obviously, depending on maturity and age, because we want to equip them for their life.
Yes, definitely.
Love that. Okay, so obviously, we've talked about next steps for you in terms of what you're doing to help to minimize the impact of nutrition and environmental toxins on some of the symptoms that your son has. I'm also curious to hear, in 6 months, in a year, do you have big dreams of how you're going to continue to help other moms that may have kids with autism?
Yes, so I've recently started, it was a small group, but it's grown pretty fast. I started a small group called Harmony Haven, which is the Autism Moms Collective. And it is a group that I run through WhatsApp, and it's just a really great community for moms to connect, kind of be able to meet anybody in their area. There is a large majority of people here in Houston, but I also have somebody as far as New Zealand. There's somebody in there from Alabama, North Carolina, really being able to like get moms together, and they're already like planning like, oh, your child's close in our age and can we meet up and everything like that. So I mean, I would love to be able to like host an event where the all of the moms and the families were to come together and really be able to connect. But I also really want to work with moms in regards to the nutrition for themselves and also for their child, and really be able to dive deep into that and help them make the changes confidently. I know a lot of it comes down to like hard conversations with family members and really being able to coach them and support them through those changes.
Love that. So please let everyone know how they can connect with you and your small group or large group as it is now.
Yes, definitely. So on Instagram, I am at underscore Roland underscore with underscore the underscore Robs. Probably need to change that, make it a little bit more simpler these days. But that's where I post most of my stuff. My group is on WhatsApp. I do share it pretty frequently through my story. You can also direct message me and I can share the link with you as well. I do kind of try to, I don't want to say like police it, but really just make sure that it is just moms of kids with autism in there. I know a lot of great resources for dads as well, but I really want to give a safe space to the moms to be able to have that connection with other moms.
I love that. And I think obviously because of the level of service and safety that you're providing in this space, that's why this group is growing so much and people literally want to meet up because the connections are so profound, and they really feel supported. So I just want to acknowledge you on that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so my last question for you is if there is a mom out there that has been wondering about changing some of the nutrition in her child's life to help them with some of the autistic symptoms that they may be experiencing, but they're feeling a little worried, maybe overwhelmed is a good one, maybe frustrated, what would be your words of wisdom for her?
Don't feel like you have to do everything at once. Small changes make a really big difference. And don't feel like you have to clean out your pantry and like get rid of everything. Make the changes slowly and as you're able, but also something I regret not doing is like keeping a journal of the changes that we had made. Document it and kind of see like what changes you make, how they affect, what changes you see in your children. But ultimately, just don't feel like you have to do everything.
Yeah, baby steps all the way.
Yes, baby steps, 100%.
Oh, I love that so much. I think this has been such an enlightening episode for people to listen to, whether or not they have kids with autism. Because I think that more and more of us are understanding how much nutrition is impacting our health and the health of the children that either we have or friends have. So I think this is a great kind of introduction for many people to really get more cognizant around how are the things that are going into my body affecting not just me, but also the people around me. So I really want to thank you for sharing your insight and your experience. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was really great.
Awesome. Okay, guys, make sure to check out all of Megan's links. I'm going to put them below, including the books that we mentioned. And obviously, this is just the beginning. There is so much more that we can find out about how foods are affecting our children with various forms of illnesses or challenges. And so I'm excited to be able to continue to share this way of thinking about our health with you in this episode as well as in future episodes. But make sure in the meantime to share this episode out with someone that you love, share it on social media. Give Megan a follow, of course, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye, guys.